This is problem 20, and it's the topic using, oh shoot, now I can't remember the topic name, but solving a application using a quadratic equation, and it'll be the topic that says irrational answers. Anyway, an arrow is shot from a height of 6 feet straight upward with an initial speed of 20 feet per second. The arrow's height h in feet above the ground after t seconds is h equals negative 16 t squared plus 20t plus 6. So you really only need to know this equation right here, this formula. All of this stuff that they're explaining like kind of goes into how the formula was derived. So like this 6 feet, the initial height is the constant, the initial speed is this 20, the negative 16 they don't explain, but that comes from gravity, so that's why it's negative. Anyway, part A, when will the arrow be 8 feet above the ground? So 8 feet above the ground, feet is the height. So it's telling us the height, and it's asking when. When means time. So it's asking what is the value of t, the time, when h equals 8. So we're going to have to solve an equation. So we're going to put 8 in for h, and then we have equals negative 16t squared plus 20t plus 6. And so what we've got here is a quadratic equation, and we have now learned several different ways to solve quadratic equations. The kind of two ways I tend to fall back on are factoring and quadratic formula. If it doesn't specify, which it doesn't here, I would kind of try one of those. But before we decide which one we want to try, let's clean this up a bit. At the very least, you'd want to subtract 8 from both sides. There's some other ways you could proceed from here, but I guess I'll do that. So subtract 8 from both sides, so that we'll have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 20t minus 2. The next thing I notice is that we have a common factor, and the smaller these coefficients are, the a, b, and c, the better. So if you do happen to notice a common factor, it's a good idea to factor that out and divide it out, I guess. Also, I don't like my a to be negative. I don't know, I just get confused. So at the very least, I would sort of factor out a negative 1. But in this case, we can factor out negative 2. So I'm going to do that. This is kind of an optional step, but it makes things a little bit easier in the long run. So we'll now have positive 8t squared, and then minus 10t, and plus 1. And so now I can actually divide both sides by negative 2, so I don't have to deal with that at all. So finally we have 0 equals 8t squared minus 10t plus 1. And this is what I'm going to use for my quadratic formula A, B, and C. So I get A is 8, B is negative 10, C is 1. And I kind of just barreled right through how I decided to use the quadratic formula. In part, I've done this exact problem like 18 times, so I remember that that's the best thing to do. But if you try to factor this, you'll just see that you can't factor it. 8 times 1, if you try and do that AC method, 8 times 1 is 8. So two numbers that multiply to 8 and add to negative 10, there are no such numbers. You can't find them. Or at least they're irrational, I guess. So factoring doesn't work. Completing the square is possible, but we would end up having to deal with fractions. So let's just do quadratic formula. Okay, so the quadratic formula, technically it would be t, but negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so equals negative 10 would be just positive 10 plus or minus square root. Negative 10 squared would be 100. and then minus 4 times 8 times 1. Maybe I'll just write that out. 4 times 8, well, times 1. Don't really need to write that, but I'll put it in there. And then all over 2 times 8. Okay, so it looks like this is going to be 100 minus 32. So 10 plus or minus square root of 100 minus 32, I think, is 68, all over 16. So most of the problems we've done, from here, we would keep our square root. We wouldn't necessarily use a calculator, and we would simplify the square root of 68 and then see if we could maybe cancel some stuff. For these types of problems, and I always forget at the beginning, but for these types of problems, Alex is going to tell you to write your answer as a decimal. So let me add that here. So we're going to give our answers as decimals rounded to, let's say, the hundredths place. Hundredths place. I'm running out of room. So 2 decimal places. Okay, and we might not have 2 answers. We might just have 1, but let's see. So I'm going to put these 2 different possibilities with the plus and with the minus into my calculator. Okay, I just opened up my calculator app. So you can also just use the Alex calculator. It's probably actually even easier to use that one. So I have to be really careful how I put this in since I have this kind of big fraction. So I'm going to use parentheses to put in the numerator. So 10, let's do the plus first. And second, square root of 68. And then I need to arrow out. Depends on how old your calculator is, like exactly what you need to do. And then divide it by 16. Okay, so 1.14 is one answer that we're going to have. Oops, 1.14. So, and that t, if you recall, was seconds, so this would be seconds. And so now let's look at if we put in the minus, if that's a reasonable answer. So I'm going to do second entry, and then just change that plus to a minus. Okay, so as long as you don't get something negative for one of these, then both your answers make sense. And we're supposed to round to 2 decimal places, the hundredths place, so 0.11. So our other answer is also a correct answer, 0.11 second. So like I said, if you had one of these was negative, you would just leave it out. And that's a possibility. So what's going on with this particular equation is it's showing that our arrow is going up and then coming down. So see if I can kind of draw this to scale. So this is supposed to be like an H axis and a T axis. So it starts at 6 feet off the ground, and then I don't know, this would be maybe 8. We were asked at how many seconds is it 8 feet off the ground, but it starts here and it goes up, and at some point it turns around and comes back down. And well, I guess it doesn't go underground, does it? So then 8 feet would be here. So what we figured out, and this is not really drawn to scale, is that happens first at 0.11 second, and then it happens again, so this would be like here-ish, at 1.14 seconds. So that's kind of like what's going on with this. Okay, so part B, how long will it take the arrow to land? So how long is another way to say, I guess, sort of when. So how long will it take the arrow to land? We're again asking or being asked to find t. And now it's sort of implied what the height is. So if the arrow has landed, its height would be 0, right? It's on the ground. So now we're going to set our initial formula. We're going to put in 0 for h. So we'll have 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 20t plus 6. Negative 16t squared plus 20t plus 6. Okay, so this one we could, it looks like we could factor out negative 2 again. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we'll get our 8t squared minus 10t, but now it'll be minus 3. And then divide both sides by negative 2. I'm not even going to write it. I'm just going to go ahead and write 0 equals 8t squared minus 10t minus 3. So you could absolutely use the quadratic formula again. A is 8, B is negative 10, C is negative 3. But this time I believe I remember that we can factor this one. So I'm going to factor because I think it's a little faster than the quadratic formula. You might disagree with me. So AC method, 8 times negative 3 is negative 24. And then we want to add up to negative 10. And so the two numbers that would multiply to negative 24 and add to negative 10, I believe would be negative 12 and positive 2. You may have to kind of list out some possibilities, but those are the ones that will work. So we can set up our factoring by grouping, 8t squared, and then minus 12t plus 2t minus 3. And it doesn't matter if you put the 12 or the 2 first, just make sure you've got the right signs. So we can factor 4t out of the first pair, and we'd have 2t minus 3. And then notice we have 2t minus 3, so we're really just factoring plus 1 out of the second pair, 2t minus 3. So then 2t minus 3 is a factor, and 4t plus 1 is the other factor. So now we can set each of these equal to 0 to get our two possible answers. So 2t minus 3 equals 0. Okay, so add 3 to both sides. 2t equals 3, and then divide by 2, we get t equals 3 halves. And I would think 3 halves would be fine, or you could write 1.5, kind of keep it consistent with the decimals. So that's definitely an answer. So let's look at this other factor. So if we subtract 1, well, we're going to get 4t equals negative 1, and then so t is negative 1/4. So you're not going to go back in time with this arrow. So negative 1/4 is not reasonable. That means we only have that single answer. Okay, so that is that last question from our notes.